As the President mentioned earlier this year, he announced the ConnectEd initiative, an effort to connect more schools to high-speed broadband, and I'm now pleased to introduce Gene Sperling, the Director of the National Economic Council and Assistant to the President for Economic Policy. We're so lucky to have Gene here today to discuss why the ConnectEd initiative is so important and describe what's at stake for classrooms across the country. Thanks for joining us, Gene.
Well, what you always want if you're doing public speaking is, and you want to generate just a lot of excitement about your appearance, is follow the President of the United States. If anybody just wants to yawn because I'm up here, just go ahead. It's all right. Back in 1993, I was here in the Clinton administration, and we're in this room, and we used to have this thing called, where we'd bring all these people in from one state. And that day it was Texas Day. And for those of you who are old enough, and if you're young enough, you should know this from your history, the most prominent Texan in the government at that point was a guy named Lloyd Bentsen. He was the vice presidential candidate in 1988. And he was supposed to appear, and everybody was sitting here waiting, but he was stuck up on the hill. And so somebody was up there just trying to stall. Finally, somebody calls over to me in the White House and says, can you just come over here real fast and talk to this crowd because they're all waiting? So I said, sure. So I ran over, and they signaled to the person up there that I was going to come speak. Unfortunately, that person didn't quite understand the signal. So she started, introducing Lloyd Bentsen. So she starts saying, and now next to Sam Houston, and next to Houston and Sam Rayburn, the greatest Texan, of the last century, Senate Finance Committee Chair, Vice President's candidate, the Secretary of Treasury, Lloyd Bentsen, and that gets like a standing ovation. And then I walk out, and there's this really, really terribly awkward moment. And of course, the woman has no bio on me at all, too. And she goes, I guess we don't have Lloyd Bentsen, but we have Gene Sperling. I think he works in the White House. And I went on, and not being pretty good on my feet, I said, I feel like I just replaced Brad Pitt on a date. So anyways, look, the other right thing to say is if you're the economic advisor to a president and you're speaking after he did, most of your speech should be probably like he just said. So I'm going to do like he just said, but a few more facts before you go off. Speaking of when I was here in the 90s, we were very focused on connectivity too. But back then, it was just could you connect school to the internet to a school? That was it. That was just kind of the goal. It's you didn't want to have a digital divide. You wanted schools to be connected. That vision really didn't go to the quality or type of learning. It was just more every school should be connected. And truthfully, most schools today are of that vision. They are connected so that they can have a computer lab, or somebody just said, have the teachers' computers. They say that the average school has the same connectivity as the average home. So guess what? If 230 people show up in your living room and start using their computers at the same time, it ain't going to go so well. So we really now look and say, it's not just good enough to be connected. You really need to have, full speed, strong broadband. And why? Why? It's not just for the sake of wires or wireless. It's not about connectivity. It's not about the equipment or the infrastructure. Those are all means to an end. And the end is a vision of learning where every kid, no matter what school district they're in, has the ability to do individual digitized learning at their desk with the same content and the same capacity as anyone else in the country or the world. And no matter how dedicated your teacher is, no matter how visionary your principal is, if you have what 80% of K through 12 schools have right now, you can't do it because you just couldn't have that degree of connectivity so that you could learn in that visionary way of everybody at their desk with a computer going at their own pace. You just couldn't do it. And so what we realized was that when you looked at why this was not the case, well, you said, well, no, actually, there's many reasons. Digital devices are too expensive. You know, it's too expensive to have to just buy a laptop or lease a laptop for everyone. And there's really not enough content to really use that as opposed to textbooks or to be able to update content as you would like. Arnie Duncan always says that the average turnaround in a textbook is 7 years. So, you know, you could be learning about President Bush right now in most classrooms, or the scientific invention of 7 years ago or 10 years ago, when in every other capacity of our lives we're able to get up-to-date information. So you said, well, it's many things. It's teachers aren't trained right, there's not the content, there's not the digital devices, yeah, and there's not the connectivity. But the thing we realized, and this is the key point, is that the connectivity is the tipping point. It's the those of you remember the movie, it's the Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. What you realize is that once you had every school having high-speed broadband, everything else would start to flow. So if you are making digital devices, you might say, well, why should I spend a lot of time spending time doing this when there's a very limited market and there's just a few schools here or there? If you suddenly heard that the top 20 states in the United States were all going to do a bulk purchase of a digital device, guess what? People would start spending a lot of time coming up with a cheaper, affordable device that was appropriate for learning in the classroom. And as those prices went down, more principals and school districts and governors would say, well, that's quite affordable. In fact, that might even be more affordable than textbooks. I might actually be able to save money doing that. So that's the tipping point, the positive cycle. And then, of course, you start telling people that if you can come up with the coolest 2nd grade or 7th grade or 11th grade way of teaching geometry or geology, that there is this huge market for it, guess what? You're going to spur that market as well. So what we really realized was this was the tipping point. If you could do this, a lot else would happen. Now policy-wise, we have to do our part. You have to make sure you have teachers that are trained to be able to know how to do this. But I want to give a sense of why this is so important to our vision of learning. A couple of things. One, just want to remind people where the president made this announcement. He announced this at Mooresville, North Carolina. There are 115 districts in North Carolina, and Mooresville was the 100th poorest of 115. And yet, or they had the 100th worst spending per student. And yet, after they institutionalized this kind of individualized digital learning, they went to the top 3 in both their performance and their completion. So a school, so we've seen the success, but it's still here and there, not everywhere. And that's what we need to help promote more. Now, again, it's not about wires and wireless and infrastructure. I want to just say a moment about what this means for how we could learn. My mother used to instruct 2nd and 3rd grade teachers on how to do assessment. And she always used to start by saying, they don't teach doctors to figure out at the end of the year whether the patient lived or died. They didn't just do an end-of-the-year test. They learned to assess how they're doing every day and what they can do to make them better. So the vision of teaching should be much more that assessment is not about an end of the year standardized test just. It's about helping teachers assess how a student is doing each and every day and being able to work with them and their parent, et cetera, on helping them improve. When you have this type of individualized digital learning, the ability for a teacher to give individualized assessment in the classroom goes way up high. Secondly, we all know that a lot of people get discouraged and drop out because of the social pressures. So you're not doing well in a classroom, you put your hand up once, you ask a question. You know, most kids, they're pretty self-conscious about asking that second question or third question, and so they fall behind because they don't have a way of asking again and trying again without feeling embarrassed. But when you're sitting with the kind of digital content where you're working at your own pace, you can keep trying and trying again. And you ask some of the teachers in Morrisville, they'll tell you in some of the places this works that one of the best things is that without shame or embarrassment, a student can keep plugging and plugging away with this vision of learning. But again, that vision of learning can't happen if you don't have high-speed broadband in those schools. And another issue too, right now, a lot of our schools feel they have to make a choice sometimes between convincing parents who think their students are advanced from staying in the schools. They face that conflict versus the conflict of not wanting to have to track or segregate their students in a way that might make some students feel they're not gifted, which we shouldn't be saying to any child. We shouldn't be lowering sights or diminishing aspirations or expectations for any child, but people feel they have to separate because, look, this child is a fourth grader who's at seventh grade math, and this is a fourth grade child who's at second grade. So, of course, we have to separate them. But when you have individualized learning in a classroom, you can keep those kids in the same classroom. They can be learning at different paces. You don't get the stigma. You don't get all the disadvantages of tracking. And that kid who's killing it in math might realize that the kid next to him who's maybe doing better in English is more talented in something else. And likewise, that student who's not achieving can be inspired by the student doing well and realize he's better or she's better than him at something else. So this is more than about wires and wireless. This is a vision of a 21st century school where you can have the most up-to-date content, where you can learn at your own pace, where we don't have to separate kids or stigmatize anyone, where people can try and try again without having to feel embarrassment. That is a very good vision of education. It's one we support. It's one this president supports. It's one our Secretary of Education, Arnie Duncan, and his Deputy Secretary, Jim Shelton, support. And it's one that we're going to do our best to promote with ConnectEd. So I really want to echo what Valerie and the president said. It is inspiring for us to see the champions of change here. Being in here 20 years, I have learned that nothing inspires public policy like success. The people who are successful, like you are showing how great things can happen. It makes people say, why can't we do more? Why can't we help that person out? Why can't we replicate that effort? And I see it with you. I saw it the other day with this woman, Estella Pyfram, who's 76 years old, took all her money and bought a bus and put computers on it, and that's what she's doing in her retirement. Those things do not have the impact of saying, oh, well, there's some champions of change out doing it, we don't need to. It has the opposite effect. People get inspired by your success, and you become the inspiration for public policymakers to want to expand it and spread it. So thank you for what you're doing. We are completely committed to this cause, and I hope the rest of the day is outstanding, though I realize that it's going to be all a little anticlimactic after this. Thank you very much.
Thanks to Jean, and thank you all for your patience and the flexibility while we were rearranging a few things. But now it's time for the main event, which is our very first Champions panel. I'd now like to bring up the first panel that will be moderated by Assistant Secretary for the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education at the Department of Justice, Deborah Delisle, and she's going to be moderating this conversation today. We are so excited to hear these champion stories and hear about Assistant Secretary Delisle's passion for connected education. So we'll bring that first panel up.
Great, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm actually at the Department of Education, so that's okay. I didn't want to think I was hanging out with the Department of Justice, so either that or I thought maybe there was like something in my folder that I was a little afraid of, so.
Just still overwhelmed with the president.
Sure, totally. And we're going to shorten our panel a little bit, and I think we know it was well worth it because having the president come in is always just such a treat. And I was so excited that the students got a chance to come up here and take a picture. So I'm going to try to be a little bit, have you be a little bit brief so we can then engage in a conversation. And I'm going to go through the line first and ask you, so you're going to have the hard part because you're going to start. Okay. So just wanted to prep you. If you think about 4 sentences, if you want to just introduce yourself to our to the group here, and in 4 sentences or fewer, describe your work so we get a concept of what the really important work you're engaged in.
My name is Misa Gonzalez. I work at Desert View High School. I teach English to freshmen, and what we do is completely digital English education, paperless, and the students work to connect with each other and communicate through different resources we have online, and to be able to collaborate with the world in our learning English reading and writing.
Great, thanks. And how long have you been doing that?
I've been at our school district for a year and a half.
Wonderful. Thanks. Brian?
I'm Brian Walsh. I'm the Director of Corrections Education for Peninsula College. I run the education programs at a maximum security and a minimum security prison in Washington State, about as far away from Washington as Washington, D.C. as you can get, in the very northwest corner. What we do with my faculty is we try to recreate the kinds of digital tools that our students will experience when they get out. Since there's no internet access at all within Washington State prisons, we've had to innovate and create our own internet. So our students are able to experience online courses as if they were on our main campus in Port Angeles.
Thank you so much. And how long have you been doing that?
6 years.
Great.
Good afternoon. I'm Daphne Bradford. I'm the founder and president of Mother of Many, a nonprofit organization that's been providing technology integration in the classroom since 2006. My first program was called Developing Digital Media Geniuses, and I became an Apple Distinguished Educator. Now I'm a Microsoft Innovative Educator. And so from integrating technology, YouTube, Apple products, Microsoft products, we've been able to grow into the gaming side of it, and we've been supporting President Obama's Educate to Innovate agenda since he's been in office, actually in 2007 when he announced it.
Great. And I'm really happy you clarified that mom to many, because I wasn't sure when I first read your bio if you're going to bring like 27 of your own personal children here, and then we were going to have to like really give you some headache medicine or something. So it's what a great concept and a great title, so thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Heather Cox. I'm a 4th grade teacher in Milton, Georgia at Crabapple Crossing Elementary School. I helped start the Bring Your Own Technology pilot for our 4th and 5th grade students, and ran an after-school technology club for students, and helped to educate the teachers and provide training within our school and throughout the school system.
Great, thank you. Todd?
And my name is Todd Nesloni. I teach 5th grade at Field Store Elementary in Waller, Texas. And what I do is my students and I do a flipped class and project-based learning environment, which is really exciting for us because we are in a very rural community with very limited internet access, and we found ways to make things like that really work for us so that my kids can learn creatively and learn through creation. And we've been able to work and get some great grants to put technology in their hands so that they have access to the tools that they're going to be using when they leave my classroom.
Great, thanks, Todd. So I'm going to actually come back down this way, but if one of you hears something that one of your other colleagues is sharing that you want to jump in on, please, because I don't want this to be super formal. You each have different roles to play, and you're in different environments, and probably all of you feel like you're a far cry from Washington, D.C. Tell me, we always think about technology as being a big game changer for teaching and learning. Can you give us one very specific example that our audience would say, yeah, that's a wow for us. That is a total game changer for teaching and learning from the roles that you each play, the lives that you lead with kids?
Well, I mean, for me, since we are project-based, my students love connecting outside of the classroom. Mm-hmm. And so with the technology that we now have, they're now able to create these incredible tools and then share them with the world at large. And I think that's sometimes things that we forget about, especially with being in very small districts like I'm from. We forget to let our kids connect, and many of mine won't ever leave the state of Texas in their lifetime. And so now, through the tools that we have, they're able to share their creations with people from all over the world.
Great.
Yeah, I think that's the important piece, is that connecting outside of the classroom. We focused a lot on the different tools to help the students understand what is beyond, and we use Skype quite a bit to reach out to people that they may never meet, visit places, like you said, they may never visit, and help them understand that things are beyond just this tiny little town that they may live in.
So before we finish down the road, so I could hear somebody, not anyone in this audience, because you are also awesome with folks, but wow, that's hard work, takes a lot of extra time, don't know if I want to do it. I'm sure you don't have educators or colleagues in your own life like that, but there are people, believe it or not, in schools across the country who feel like there's too much extra work. How do you deal with that? Why do you not feel that way?
With me, I mean, when you see the look in a kid's eye, when they get to do that kind of things. I mean, my classroom is involved in a program called Classroom Champions, which is where they have an Olympic athlete that we get to work with all school year and learn character education from. And we had our first Google Hangout with him on Monday. And to see the kids' excitement over it was actually a Paralympic athlete that they finally got to meet and talk to. And when you see things like that, I mean, there's no bigger proof. And when other people ask me, well, how do you get other teachers on board? I say, I let my kids do the talking because they're their biggest element of change.
Great messengers.
Yeah, our students just published their websites. Each student in our class has their own website, and they were just finally officially published. And the excitement that somebody could go and read it. So anyone could do it if they had the address. That's what keeps you going. And then you marry somebody that lets you spend all that time working on those things. So
for those of you who are single, that was like dating advice. The champions are all about everything, so that's great. So Daphne, what about I'm sorry, go ahead.
For me, you're starting with the second largest school district in the nation, LAUSD. So for Mother of Many, I came from the professional industry as a syndicated radio specialist. So I was producing my own radio shows with a lot of well-known celebrities, and so that was a carrot for the kids. And so when you take them out and show them that they can do the same thing, that inspires from a very creative visual learning perspective. So you have them. So to get the educators involved, when they see that themselves, they're interested. Well, how do you do that, and how do we do that here? But I think the biggest advantage for me to remain so long is I had a leader at the school that was very innovative and says, I'm going to give you the stage because you can help save my kids. So for me, having students from Watts, California, and we've traveled to Washington, D.C., and we've toured the White House. So to go from Watts to South L.A., even to the Valley, in Los Angeles, all the way to the White House, you teach them to dream the most unimaginable dream and make it happen. But you're using it creatively. You're using it with technology. Technology is not going to wait on us to teach it. And so when you have a kid that comes out of my personal class, when I have one, what is that teacher going to do with that child? So it's mom's responsibility. We go into the classroom because, most professional development, 8 to 20 people, and then the teacher is off on their own. With me, I come in, and I'm in your classroom. I'm there to help you begin that integration.
So you're cheerleading and you're hand-holding and you're supporting.
And I'm there. And they can reach me via email, text, Skype, and it's right now.
Yeah.
So that's how you're able to get the teacher and the educator. But, as Todd said, when you see that sparkle in the eye of that student, especially a student that doesn't know the power of the ubiquitous power of technology, once you see that, you have that kid. And so that it becomes an intervention piece for math, science, English. Just go online and find it.
So, and Brian, you work with kids who, for a variety of reasons, haven't found their own way in life, and because of circumstances, they are in places far different than so many of our students.
And actually, I work with adults.
Oh,
in
okay,
in
I'm
exactly
sorry.
that case. So,
Okay.
And many of our adults have come through the juvenile detention system.
So lost their
And
way
so-
somewhere along the way. Yeah,
And we
yeah.
have 16-year-olds who are now in their 20s or 30s who have never held smartphones, cell phones, been on the internet. Many cases, they've never used a computer at all. So I think the image that comes to mind is an older student that I had in his 50s who had never been on a computer in his entire life and is getting out. He's re-entering in about 2 years. And for the first time, he gets on the computer and starts to learn how to design 3D objects and creates his own website and just totally just sort of embraces this idea that I need to learn something about the world before I get out into it. So for me, what's inspiring is the student who can say, I feel like I'm better prepared for release. I know what I can do. I have some skills that are marketable. That's what inspires me. I know that's what inspires my faculty. And I think to answer your other question about people who say it's too difficult, to be honest, it's really boring to sit in the classroom in a prison without technology. And your students don't want to listen to lectures. And we have a tough group of students to work with. So bringing technology in is just a natural tool to make it more fun, more engaging, and to address the kinds of challenges that we have.
Yeah. So,
I thought my freshmen were intense. But, no, well, what really gets me is when I was leaving and I said, I'm going to be gone for 3 days. And they said, does that mean we get to write the whole time? I'm like, yeah, because they're writing novels this month. That's what they're doing. And so they begged me not to give them any other assignments, just to let them write. They have to have 30,000 words at the end of the month. Okay. And when you have 164 freshmen begging you to let them write, that's what you want. Mm-hmm. And that's what the technology gives me the ability to do, because they can write 30,000 words, and then we can edit them together as groups. We can share it out. We can send it to parents. We can put it online if we want to. Anything we can do, you cannot do with paper and pencil. I mean, just writing a 3-page essay takes 4 weeks, 3 weeks. If you edit and revise and hand it, can't do that.
like a real writer.
Yeah,
Jackie,
so
like a real
we're
writer.
writing novels. They're
Yeah.
writing novels, and that's what really gets other teachers inspired too.
So what about challenges? Have any of you had one challenge in this integration of technology where you thought, you know what, I just don't know that I can overcome this? What's been the biggest challenge? You're nodding your head, Todd.
Well, standardized testing plays a part in everything that we do, even incorporating technology. And when I transformed my classroom and went completely flipped and project-based, we got rid of test formatted questions. We got rid of paper pencil. We wanted to do creation, and that was a very scary move. My administrator at the time, Claudia Mordecai, she was very supportive of me and very much of you know what, let's try this. Let's see if this can work. And so that was terrifying for me, because regardless of how much I believed in what I was doing, I still have scores that I have to get at the end of the year. But it paid off in dividends. Now I'm sending kids off and having junior high teachers call back and say, we can see a clear difference because your kids understand what they're doing. Because I admit it, I taught a test because I had to get that success, and now I'm able to teach the skills, and the test comes easily now.
Other folks?
I was going to say with our Bring Your Own Technology pilot, that could be scary for parents. They spend the money on these devices. We're asking them, send them with your children and let us take care of it. So that there was an occasional pushback, and it was educating the parents on what exactly we were going to do, that it wasn't just a substitution for paper and pencil, that it was going to allow us to do things far beyond what we were able to do already.
Part of what I do is that I hit a roadblock and then we just try and conquer it. So things are scary, but there's nothing that has stopped me and said, I'm not going to do this, or this is too much. It's just like, no, we're going to figure this out. Okay, you don't have your laptop today? You have your smartphone. You have, somebody else's laptop or device or anything. Whatever you're going to do, you're going to do it, and we're going to figure it out. And so I think that's part of what makes all of us, the champions, is that we just push through it. I mean, you have to.
Yeah.
You have to.
So do you find yourselves often isolated, or do you feel like you're I know you're not the only teacher who does that, but there are times when you stop using textbooks, or you say to folks, we're going to do this no matter what, or I'm going to, you have a whole different kind of ethos around professional development and supporting teachers. How is it that you can insulate yourself, or, how do you deal with that in a setting? Because so many of our folks, it's too easy to get caught up in the, why are you doing that? It's not going to matter. It's too hard. How do you sustain yourself, your own soul?
You just keep talking about it and keep letting the kids inspire you. And that's part of what I have to do, is I have to keep telling all my teachers, because we're completely digital at our schools. Everybody has a laptop. They all take them home. And there's teachers who are reluctant to step up and say, we're going to use this every day. They just say, oh, no, go put it over there. And I keep pushing, we have to do this. That's how we run the world. The way we got here today was completely digital. There's nothing that we did with paper and pencil. And so you just have to keep pushing the teachers, even though there is some fight back.
And
For me,
go ahead.
For me, cloud computing is the key, because it can save you. If you forget your flash drive, if your computer crashes, just go to the cloud and get it.
Right.
And also for students, I was walking to school and somebody drove by and splashed water on my backpack. Go to the cloud and let me have the assignment.
Right.
Don't worry about this. Don't worry about losing your
So
flash
suddenly those
drive.
creative excuses about the
Yeah,
dog
no
eating it is
problem.
like,
There is no
there
lost
are
homework.
no,
But,
there's
you
no
know,
lost homework.
Make the teacher feel comfortable. Do a personal deal. Put your grocery list up there. Put your daughter's or your son's, something that you need to remember in the cloud. And when you get to where you need to go, just go up there and get it. So that's a good answer for me, because there isn't a technology challenge that I haven't been able to conquer and get the support from, the schools that I deal with, like Dorsey and Crenshaw and Locke High School in the past.
Yeah.
I have a very different situation. Technologically, we're not allowed to have the internet at all within the prisons. So that, I think 6 years ago when I started, would have been a major roadblock. But I think I surrounded myself with really innovative faculty and just kind of set them free. Let them come up with the ideas. And they will tell you that sometimes I drive them a little crazy, saying, well, why don't we try this? Why don't we try this? And then they just kind of run with it. So I think having people just within a team who want to try things out and experiment and be willing to fail. And we've had plenty of times where we realized that technologically we were going to cause problems. We work really closely with our Department of Corrections because the last thing we want to do is create a security issue. So if you start off with just open communication with them and sitting down with your faculty and sitting down with security to create an environment, that works very well. And they are finally accepting that there are going to be times where things look really strange for a prison. I have inmates teaching or creating computer games. And the first thing you have to tell them is, no, we're not going to be making World of Warcraft or Doom remakes, right? It's just not appropriate.
Yeah.
But that's challenging for them. But our Department of Corrections is so supportive of it, of preparing these inmates for release and our students to be successful, that is also the inspiration.
Just out of curiosity, when I travel around the country, one of the great parts of my job is I get a chance to see just amazing education going on. It's not really the kind of things that media writes about, but I know in my heart of hearts that there's more of that going on every day. And I could say there are pockets of excellence all over, whether it's with technology, blended learning. Is this something unique in the prison system? Is it gaining momentum?
I think it's starting to gain momentum. There's a number of colleges that are trying to do similar things. I think there are challenges. There's technical challenges, and then there's the challenge that all of us face with training faculty. We're used to doing things a certain way. So I think, at least in Washington State, we're fairly unique, but one of the nice things is that all of the community colleges that provide education programs there, we share like crazy. And the way we developed our system is we use all open source tools so that it's not proprietary. We want people to take what we've learned and fix it and figure out better ways of doing it.
Yeah.
So we share everything.
So let's just move a little bit to some assessment of students. You know, everything around our country right now is so focused in the K-12 space, at least, in college and career ready standards. It's all about whether it's Common Core or college and career ready standards. But for me, and I've been an educator for 39 years, what has always been so essential to my students is that they learn what I call life skills. You know, the ability to get along with one another and communicate and all that. And I hear sometimes people say if we get kids into technology, there's this sort of social isolationism. Or you can't grade. I mean, I could grade a student's work in writing a novel, but the other elements of human dimensions can't always be measured. Do any of you incorporate that in the kinds of things you look at for growing students or for how you assess whether or not you're successful?
Well, we do. I know that earlier you mentioned, I'm a believer that, negativity can kill innovation really quickly. And many of us may come from environments where people aren't used to changing things. And so becoming involved in social media connected me with other educators from around the nation, that inspires me and gives me ideas to do things in my classroom. And so now, everything we do in my class is partner and group work because they need to learn to work with people. And I always tell them, I don't like everybody I work with. You're not ever going to like everybody I put you with, but you got to learn.
Is this being filmed, by the way?
But I tell them, I say, do you know who I don't like? No, you don't know. Because I learned how to work with them and make it work.
Great.
And so you have to do the same thing because that's the environment that we have to set them up for, is that no matter who I put you with, you have to be collaborative and creative and give me an end product. You can't not give me something because you don't like that person. And in 5th grade, that's really a challenge to teach them
I was
that.
actually, this is a really funny story. I was in a school in California, and it was at a high school, and one of the ways in which they were working in groups, that every student in the school got 2 pink slips for the year. They could hold them on tight, and then when they worked in a group, they could actually give a pink slip, like a firing notice, to one of the people in the group. They could only use 2 all year. And they had to go defend to the principal or counselor why they were firing that person. I thought, wow, you get fired one time from a group. Like, that's a little bit scary, right? But it was a great life lesson, too, about what you're talking about. So, others? Yeah,
for
Daphne?
me, I am specific. My specialty is college and career because I come from career. I know what they need to survive and make it. So you must collaborate. You must be a team. Everything is project-based. And so when you start with 9th graders, because I've been in high school, they're a blank canvas. And it's a good way for them to learn about each other. But when you're on a job, somebody is better at something, and you're not as good as that. So this is how you come together and make a really good project. So as a result of doing that, you have, some 10th and 11th graders teaching podcast engineering at Cal State Dominguez Hills. I can send them over to get an internship at a major corporation. And when you take them out and beyond their environment, and they can actually see it, and then come back in the classroom and do that, then that creates a whole nother dynamic in the brain. I can really do this, but they can become an entrepreneur, a content producer, and not just a consumer of the product.
So it sounds like, and even Brian, in your work, you're, as Daphne just explained, you're also making connections to real-world experiences so that lesson on page 32 suddenly comes alive, and the sterility of a textbook preceding page 31, 32, 33, which is really ever so boring, suddenly comes alive because that question of when am I ever going to use this is suddenly becoming real. Is that accurate? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Go ahead.
When we work together, it's all through email. It's all through communication that way. So just like with getting here, I had to email. I had to talk to people all digitally. So my students have learned to communicate with me at 11 o'clock at night. They'll send me, is this due tomorrow? And I can send them immediately back a response, no, it's okay, we'll take care of it tomorrow. So just that, being able to use basic email, being able to communicate appropriately through email and not like tweeting or Facebook or whatever, that's a life skill that everybody needs to know. And if they ask me, are you going to write a novel with us? I go, I just wrote a 5,000-word email yesterday. I don't think I'm going to, and they're like, okay. So, I just because they're writing novels, they still have to learn how to communicate, and that's the way.
So how has this all changed how you think about your roles? And I'm assuming any one of your preparation programs didn't necessarily set you up to do this. And I always find when I meet these absolutely amazing people in work, like champions of change and just amazing people, somewhere it came from some place and you had to learn. What happened for you to change either your paradigm or your philosophy about this?
For me, I was going to quit teaching. I had taught for 5 years and I had success, but like I said, I was a test teacher and I felt like that was the only way I could be successful, and I didn't like that. That's not why I became a teacher. I didn't become a teacher. I wanted to change lives and I didn't feel like I was doing that. And then my coworker, Stacy Huffine, came to me and gave me this new idea and said, let's be creative. Let's try this wild idea that nobody else is doing around us right now, and let's really try to run with it. And I did that, and it just reinvigorated me. And then when I could see the joy of learning in my students, I thought I could be here forever.
So you found sort of that calling and
Right.
that new place for you, yeah.
Yeah, as a fourth grade teacher, you're always hearing, we have to get them ready for middle school. We have to get them ready for middle school. And for me, I never really understood that. I'm much more of that. I want to light that fire or inspire or have them find that thing that they want to do beyond the college even. What do they want to do? And that's really where I've been focused.
That's great.
The life changer and the game changer for me, I was set up to do an interview with Rosa Parks. So after I got over the fact that I'm really talking to Rosa Parks on the phone, I learned that she had learned how to send email in her 80s. Some of my friends, they would shun email. I don't have time. I don't want to worry about learning that. When I told them that, and they could hear her tell me that, because there was a recorded interview, I said, well, if you have the mother of the civil rights movement sending email, I think we should do that. And that was in 1999, and we were moving into the 21st century. So I'm like, I'm going with this. If she's going, I'm going to.
That's great. That's great.
What was a game changer for me was coming from a world of connectivity on our main campus, going to a world where you had no connection, and that just wasn't going to work for me. I think our offenders they're going to release, they're going to come back to society. They need to be prepared, and they need the same tools that every other student, college, K-12 needs. So I wanted to bring that to them as well.
I was at the U of A. I graduated a year and a half ago, and I did everything digitally. All of my work was online. I sent all my papers in through the computer, everything, and I showed up at the school, and I went, where's the computers? And then they gave them to us, and so that really was like, oh, that's what I need. I was already there. I was already wanting it as a student, and as soon as they gave it to me, I went, this is what I'm doing with my students. It's how our world works in college. It needs to work in high school that way too.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on this panel. I know that our time has been limited. I really appreciate it. But one of the things I'm hoping all of you got from at least our very brief conversation, which could have gone on probably for hours, is the fact that one of these individuals talked about, I want my kids to master the states and their capitals. They all talked about relationships that they were building with kids and honestly, and with adults, and the relationships that you build tell people, adults and children, what it is that you really value. So I really, from the bottom of my heart, from the Secretary of Education, I really want to thank you for teaching and learning in a totally different kind of way. It just gives my heart such great warmth to know that adults and children are in your presence and you are taking care of them for our present as well as our future. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.